we're about to introduce you to a gentleman I'm sure you're all familiar with. I want to bring you up to date on his latest project, which is an album called Paris. He spent a great deal of time, in fact, I guess the last year, is that right, Malcolm, in Paris, working on a piece of music, several pieces of music that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is basically an homage to the French influence on English music during the 60s. Very much a mixture of jazz and Jack Kerouac and that kind of thing. As usual, very much the cutting edge of what's coming up in the future as far as music is concerned. And he's just going to grab a coffee and maybe a bagel. Anyway, this new album will be out in April. For those of you that are unaware of its existence at all, it will be out in April, and we're really looking forward to hearing it. Do you want to put it on now and listen to it? So, in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen, Malcom McLaren.
As usual, I don't have anything prepared. But, and I'm very late. That's a problem most of my life. But I'm sure you've got to run off to these other, whatever they are, working parties. And maybe it's better if you just, rather than me talk to you about the life of Geronimo or whatever, I don't know, it'd be better if you ask questions, I guess, then I'll know what you really need me here for. I don't know anything about your country, really. I know it's a big, wide, open space. I'm sure you get up to all sorts of things. But how can I be of assistance?
Malcolm, how did you, when you started off the Sex Pistols and that, how did you know that that was what England was looking for musically?
You know, no one ever knows what anybody's looking for, if you're truthful, really. You do what you believe you personally care about. I'm, you know, it's merely an emotional reaction, like anybody else who, you know, uses music to express themselves. It's always been I suppose, a simple open door with no education or necessary qualifications. You are able to enter this fray of debauchery and decadent life, and most of us, I suppose, from the age of 13 were obsessed with this pursuit, and I included. And as a fan, it was obvious that at some point or another, I would dally in this river. So that's the answer. The Sex Pistols, that's a whole nother story. It's a personal story. It would take me a hell of a long time to go into that. Safe to say that, well, it's just based on my life and times and thoughts and thinking and working with younger people than myself at the time, but ultimately I influenced them and wasn't genuinely interested in the music at all, to be perfectly honest. I never, you know, once you've heard Chuck Berry, you kind of heard it already. You know, it's a never-ending cycle, and people in your country probably get less bored than people in my country playing it, because you're still doing it. And that's not to be patronising in any way. It's just to say that you're fractionally more naive and genuinely more innocent, and it's probably more endemic to you because across the water you have the big, vast, wonderful world of the United States, and there they play it to their hearts, you know, content. It's an adorable cliche. Et voilà, c'est fini. Okay. What else can I help you with this bright sunny morning here? Well, I always had the idea that he would be an extraordinary character in Las Vegas, and the first step on that rung was to record a song that had been made so notorious and famous by Frank Sinatra. The man who wrote it lived in Paris and died in his bath, and I was in Paris. Paris has always been a place, and an extraordinary place for most of my inspiration and career, if you can call it that. My Way was a suitable song, I thought, for Sid, and he didn't at the time. He wanted to be like one of those fast-rolling rock and roll bands, the Ramones, so he hated the orchestration that I gave him of all these Parisian noble little violinists, and decided to toughen the track up, and so it starts very, very slow, that's my part, and it ends very fast, that's his part, and that was it. He was asking me about this muddy hole that I was born in called England, and what's happening musically in this forest of barbarians. Not very much, I think, probably due to the fact that we've lived under a Conservative government for maybe 12 or more years, which you have to understand. If you think it doesn't affect the culture, let me tell you, it really and genuinely does. Probably more than one generation now, having lived under this spur of a woman, has turned them all into terribly clean, not very bright, culturally moribund generation, poetically pathetic, with lack of vision and care about anything, and God bless them. That's it. I don't know. Music industry's never been that intelligent, in my opinion, so I suppose any aid and help in that direction, and if that's the world of science, then great. I think science, without a shadow of a doubt, today rules the way we live and the way we think, for better or for worse. The train is on the track, and no one knows where it's heading. The future seems to have already passed us by, and even in the shadow of your illustrious writer here, William Gibson, he already seems very, very dated. I think that world of technology is talked about sometimes too much. The world of philosophy, within that technology, within characters and writers like Stephen Hawking, would be better spent in deciphering his thinking. But science on a whole, it's an interesting time we live in, I think, because science seems to be gaining speed, as it did after the Renaissance. But it took the Germans to take it on, and North Europeans, and make use of it and finally conquer the world with it. Science then went into the doldrums somewhat, I suppose. It suddenly reared its head again and has become very valid and a very important moment now culturally, but it hasn't made the bridges into the arts, and maybe music, and maybe this industry. I hate that word because it really is not an industry, it's a kind of marriage of cowboys. They may use it to change the way you feel, think, and give you more opportunity to express yourself. I don't know, time would only tell, but we all know that technology has provided new genres in music that have been created out of what I suppose you could call an underground, that became, for want of a better word, dance music. I still don't understand that word. I mean, I thought all music was to dance to, in some shape or form. But it was more to do with the environment, the cavern, the discotheque, a place which fielded, stars out of the DJ, have used technology probably far more than the ordinary everyday artist. And techno music, which is virtually diagrammatic, groin-like, quite fascist in many respects, and obviously finds a wonderful home in Germany and a wonderful home in Belgium and most Anglo-Saxon cultures. It hasn't really found its way into the Latin end of things, what I call the Mediterranean countries, yet, but it probably will do because it has a kind of primitive force. The sad thing about this world of dance music, though, is that it lacks poetry. The poets seem to have gone out of the business of writing songs, and it's one of the reasons I think that music itself is lacking now in intellect. Not to say that it didn't lack intellect in the 50s too. It did, but the 60s was a world in which suddenly politics, vision, ideals, thoughts were used in music, and that's why fundamentally that period of time is constantly looked back upon as something wonderful. We've kind of gone full cycle in a way, but history doesn't really repeat itself because we live in this world, as you've talked about, technology. I don't know where that's going to lead. I can't, I'm not very technologically minded. I'm a product of the 60s and it's difficult enough opening doors and, there you go. You know, you've got all these cards these days. I'm an old key merchant, really. What else can I do for you?
Okay, yeah, I got a question. I read not too long ago that you were getting involved in television commercials or something. I'd like you to comment on that if you can, please.
Oh. Well, there's not much to comment, really. I mean, I suppose making music and making video clips, putting music to video clips, putting music to commercials, it all seems part of the same thing today. Commercials make pop records are put into commercials. I don't know, it's just one big dreadful business, really. It was a way of making a living. I was suddenly thought upon as this character that brought elegance, the opera world into the pop world. And people such as British Airways wanted to make their airlines look more elegant than everybody else's. So they hired me to make them an anthem that was based around an opera. And I did that, and it was very successful. And more and more people asked me to do the same thing to champagne, stockings, I don't know, motor cars, all the things you buy, just like records. It's just product. It's not a major art form. I wouldn't want to spend more than a few minutes talking about it, really. I have to make a statement here about music. Only thing I can say is what I do and what I've always done, I suppose, is look upon it as having always the potential to become a major art. When it's a minor art, it seems inconsequential, and it's very much like Kleenex. It's disposable, it's easy, and we use it, and we're all very seduced by it. But as an artist, it's not important enough. It doesn't warrant the torture, the trouble, the time, the aggravation, and all the things that go into a struggle to express yourself. When I managed the Sex Pistols, if you can call it that, I was really only concerned with using music to turn into something I call a major art form. Now, that doesn't mean that the sound of the record or the chords of another version of Yet Let It Rock by Chuck Berry or so was the ultimate idea. The idea was much bigger than that, because that in itself isn't sufficient anymore. And not for me, and it wasn't even then. It had much more to do with the attitude that encircled around it, more to do with the presentation of it, the poetry that laid on top, the look of the person that was performing it, and the potential to control and, I would say without hesitation, murder the media. Murder the industry, and try to successfully control the form, which in this instance was a name, an idea, called the Sex Pistols. I was responsible for that, and momentarily it did turn into a major art form. I think often throughout this pop music invention, this rock and roll thing that comes from here or near here, has had those moments. People talk to me all day long about the Sex Pistols, and I still don't quite understand why nobody understands that thing about them. It was short-lived, it was poetic, it was impactful, because all of those things I've just talked to you about circulated around it. The media became our lover, and by being our lover, one was able to kick it up the arse sometimes, and also control it in lots of ways, and have the world fall in love with you. That in itself was its achievement, and it still has impact today, because there are very, 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 very few moments in this particular culture's history that ever happens. But don't look for the secret in the music. It doesn't exist. It's invisible. I've always been fascinated by the colour black, because it is invisible. And the Sex Pistols mostly wore black. That was an intention on my behalf, because in it there is a kind of a certain soul that could be described as dark, bored, and revengeful. And those thoughts were, if you know the word, very existential. And the Sex Pistols were an existentialist group, an unconscious one. They were very nihilistic, is what I'm saying, and nihilistic in a positive and optimistic manner. Their destructive attitude was always a divine comedy, and they gave a great deal of inspiration and entertainment to those that understood that. Well, I think any great idea is always often surrounded by controversy, because most people never understand it, and fear, and the fear is based on the fact that we're all very subjected people, even here in Canada, I'm sure. So the word controversy is a silly word, really. It's just a misnomer. It's basically it's ignorance, It's a hard question to answer. I think that what you have to understand is the media in the 70s was far more naive than the media in the 90s, or even at the end of the 80s. You also have to understand that that the desire today to be in the media, to be within the circus, to desire to be on the cover of Vogue magazine, to be rich and good looking and famous all in one go, is a desire that never really was cool in the 70s. It was totally uncool in the 60s. Because people were far more confident about their ideas. Today, people have very little confidence, and you talk about this particular album. That album was made under great duress. I was employed by a Hollywood film company, and I was constantly taking leave of absence because I was so bored. And I had to make a record only to exercise some kind of movement of my body. Making that record was a way of leaving Hollywood temporarily. I certainly couldn't stay and help the record company sell the record. I could only physically do it. And I'd tell you the truth, I was only doing it for Jeff Beck. It was supposed to be his record, it wasn't mine. He just kept buggering off. And I was left having to clean up the mess, and it finally became my record, but not by choice. Sometimes that happens in life, you know. Some artist gives you the paintbrush and tells you to get on with it, but it's nothing to do with you, really. And if you're a kind, noble creature like myself, sometimes you obey. I meet bankers on Wall Street. I meet toilet attendants. They both seemingly are fans. I have no idea how they hell meet or have the same musical taste. Music is extraordinary. It gets into all sorts of places where other people and other things can't. I don't know who my fans are. I hope they're intelligent. That's all. Well, I think they think I was a manager, but I really was a mismanager. I didn't ever wish to enroll in that happy fraternity of pop managers. I'd tell you the truth, I'm too arrogant to be someone like that. I found it a way of life that I was not part of. I happened to become one for a particular purpose in my life, which was to jump out of a shop on the King's Road and utilize those clientele, the young, dispossessed, disenfranchised kids who were hanging on to the coattails of Roxy Music, I think, in those days, David Bowie, etc., but wanted to do something else. At that time, the only thing I had to offer was making them wear black rubber and leather and tit clamps and dog collars and chains, and but they were all virgins, and these clothes became a wonderful fashion parade. They became a statement on the street that said they were different from their older brother or their mother or father. The thought of them going to get a job in a bank wearing a rubber miniskirt was considered wonderful in my eyes, and a bigger achievement than being in a rock and roll band. But that was because I was looking at it from the eyes of a black rubber skirt, and how that could excite, you know. Inside a bank, you know, it has a different feeling. And I've forgotten your question now. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, right, yes. Well, the misconception is that just that. I'm an artist. all the rest is bullshit, really. I was a brilliant actor as a manager, and I had no fear because I had no respect. I had no respect because it was plain to see the record industry as people that were often without taste, first and foremost. Secondly, often without intellect. And thirdly, they brought to shame virtually every minute of the day an art form that was had potential to be major, but was always a very, very shabby minor.